Josephine was not supposed to be at that dinner. She had made that clear to Kwame 3 separate times in the week leading up to it, and Kwame, who was her colleague and not her keeper, had listened to all 3 objections with the patient expression of someone who had already decided the outcome and was waiting for her to arrive at it. The first time she had said it was on Monday. They were in the office kitchen and she was making the kind of tea that required 3 steps, and Kwame was leaning against the counter eating something that was definitely not lunch and definitely not healthy. And she had said, very clearly, "I am not going to the Park family dinner on Friday." Kwame had said, "Okay." The second time was Wednesday. They were in the elevator and she had said, "I want it on record that I have no interest in attending a family dinner for a man I have been working with for 6 weeks." Kwame had said, "Noted." The third time was Friday morning, 40 minutes before she was supposed to leave for the restaurant, standing in her apartment in Yoido in the dress she had not planned to wear because she had not planned to go, and she had called Kwame and said, "I am telling you one final time that I am not going." Kwame had said, "Your taxi is outside." She was at the dinner. The restaurant was in Cheongdam-dong, and it was the kind of place that did not need to advertise, because the people who needed to know about it already knew, and the people who did not know were not being considered. Private dining room. Round table. Calligraphy on the wall that she could read, because she had been in Seoul for 14 months and had spent approximately 9 of those months in determined and systematic pursuit of functional Korean literacy. She could read the calligraphy. It said, roughly translated, that the strength of a family was determined by what it chose to protect. She was thinking about the calligraphy when the door to the private dining room opened and the Park family arrived. There were 4 of them. Park Min-jae first, her client, the man she had been working with for 6 weeks, 32 years old, chairman of the Park Group's technology division. The reason she was in this restaurant on a Friday evening, in a dress she had not planned to wear. He was composed and direct in the way she had come to understand was simply how he existed in the world. Not a performance of composure, but the actual thing, the kind of stillness that came from knowing exactly where you stood at all times. Behind him, his father, Park Sung-ho, the senior chairman, 64 years old, the man who had built the Park Group from a mid-sized construction company into one of the most significant conglomerates in South Korea. He had the particular presence of men who had made consequential decisions for long enough that consequence had become their natural atmosphere. Behind him, a younger man who shared Min-jae's jaw and his father's eyes, Park Min-jun, 28, the younger brother, whom she knew from briefings and who was apparently the family member most likely to say exactly what he was thinking at any given moment without editorial filter. And last, with the particular entrance of someone who had decided exactly how this evening was going to go before she left her house, Park Yoon-suk, the mother. Josephine had read everything available about Park Yoon-suk before this dinner. Not because she was anxious, because she believed in preparation the way some people believed in prayer, as the most honest form of respect for a situation you could not fully control. Park Yoon-suk was 61 years old, the daughter of a family whose own business interests predated the Park Group by a generation, a woman who had built the Park family's social architecture over 30 years with the same precision and patience that her husband had applied to its financial one. She chaired 2 cultural foundations. She sat on the boards of 3 significant institutions. She had, in the 37 years of her marriage, never once been photographed looking anything other than entirely intentional. She walked into the private dining room, and her eyes found Josephine in approximately 2 seconds. The look lasted 3 seconds. It communicated, without requiring any language, the following: "I know exactly who you are. I know exactly why you are here. I have not decided yet whether I am going to allow this evening to proceed according to your expectations, and I would like you to understand that the last sentence is not a threat. It is simply information." Josephine held the look. She held it for the full 3 seconds and then she smiled. Not the professional warm smile she kept for client introductions, and not the social smile she kept for situations that required managing, but the actual one. The one her mother called the Josephine smile, because it was too specific to belong to anyone else. Park Yoon-suk looked at her for one more second. Then she sat down. The evening had begun. Let's go back to the beginning. Josephine Adeyemi was 28 years old, Lagos born, Yoruba by her father's family and Edo by her mother's, and currently the youngest senior consultant at Meridian Strategy Group's Seoul office, which she had arrived at through a combination of the kind of intelligence that announces itself quietly and the kind of work ethic that her undergraduate professor had described as almost alarming in its consistency. She had come to Seoul 14 months ago on a project assignment that was supposed to last 6 months. She had extended it twice. The first extension was professional. The Park Group engagement was expanding, and her managing director had asked her to stay. The second extension was something she was less certain how to categorize, which was itself information of a kind she was still processing. She was precise with language in the way that people who have grown up between 2 cultures and multiple languages were precise. Not because precision was easy, but because ambiguity had consequences she had learned to take seriously. She said what she meant. She meant what she said. She had been described by colleagues as direct, by clients as refreshingly clear, and by her best friend a Daisy who had known her since they were 11 years old and had zero obligation to be diplomatic as the most specific human being currently operating on the African continent and possibly beyond. Adaze had said this with great affection. Josephine had accepted it as the compliment it was intended to be. She had started working with Park Min-jae 6 weeks ago when his division had engaged Meridian for a strategic communications restructuring project. The engagement had been assigned to her because she had experience with technology sector communications, and because her managing director understood that Park Min-jae was the kind of client who responded to precision rather than performance, and Josephine was constitutionally incapable of performing when she could be precise. 6 weeks of working with Park Min-jae had produced the following professional assessments, filed in her project notes under client profile. Exceptionally capable, genuinely interested in the work rather than the optics of the work, intolerant of anything that wasted his time, but patient with anything that was worth his time, and possessed of the particular quality of attention that she had encountered in very few people across her professional career. The kind that was not selective, but total. The kind that when it landed on you, made you feel that whatever you were saying was the most important thing currently being said anywhere. It was professionally notable. She had kept it in the professional column. The family dinner had been Kwame's idea, which meant it was Park Min-jae's idea communicated through Kwame, which meant it had been thought about before it was suggested, which meant it was not casual. She had known all of this and gone anyway. Because Kwame's taxi had arrived, and also because she had, in the privacy of her own assessment, determined that the situation warranted the information that only this dinner could provide. Park Yoon-suk's 3-second look had, in its way, confirmed that assessment completely. Dinner in Korean family contexts of this nature had its own grammar, and she had been studying Korean grammar in both its literal and its structural dimensions for 14 months. She understood what was ceremonial and what was substantive. She understood which conversations were being conducted on the visible surface, and which ones were happening in the register underneath. The surface conversation was about business, specifically about the Park Group's expansion into West African markets, the research and strategy work her firm was doing, the timeline, the approach. Park Sung-ho asked questions that were genuinely curious rather than performatively interested, and she answered them with the complete specificity she brought to everything, which produced a conversation that was more substantive than family dinners of this type usually were. Park Min-joon, who had the filter settings of someone who had decided sincerity was more interesting than diplomacy, said at one point, You speak Korean. Yes. Your briefing document said functional. My briefing document was conservative. Why? She looked at him across the table. Because I find that people reveal more interesting things when they believe language is creating a barrier. Park Min-jin stared at her. Then he looked at his brother. Then he looked back at her. I like her, he announced to the table. Park Sung-ho made a sound that might have been suppressed amusement. Park Min-jae looked at his food with the expression of someone maintaining composure by directing attention toward the rice. Park Yoon-suk looked at Josephine. The look was different from the first one, still assessing. But the calculation behind it had shifted.
Your family is in Lagos. Yes. You have been in Seoul for 14 months. Correct? Alone. With colleagues and a small number of people who have become genuine friends, but my family is in Lagos, yes. And you chose to stay beyond your original assignment. The question underneath the statement was clear. She answered the statement and the question. The work was worth staying for, and Seoul is a city that rewards patience. I have found both the professional and the personal returns on that patience to be significant. Park Eun-suk looked at her for a long moment. Miotiso. Interesting. The dinner continued. The register underneath the surface was more complex, and she tracked it with the same attention she brought to everything. Park Eun-suk was not hostile. Hostility would have been simpler. What she was vigilant. The vigilance of a woman who had built something significant and intended to protect it, and was currently conducting an assessment of a variable she had not previously encountered in the protective architecture she had constructed around her family. The variable was Josephine. Not just professionally. That was the surface. The thing underneath the surface was visible in the way Park Min-jae oriented toward her when she was speaking. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, but in the small physical grammar of attention that she had spent 14 months learning to read in Korean professional and social contexts, and that meant something specific. Park Eun-suk could read it too. She had been reading her son for 32 years. After dinner, in the corridor outside the private dining room while coats were being retrieved, Park Eun-suk appeared beside Josephine with the precision of someone who had planned the moment. Walk with me. It was not a question. They walked. The corridor of the restaurant was long and tastefully lit and empty at this hour, and Park Eun-suk walked it with a particular posture of someone who had decided that posture was a form of communication. My son is the chairman of a significant division of a family business that has taken 30 years to build. Josephine listened. The Park Group is not simply a company. It is the expression of a family's values across 3 generations. Its governance structure, its reputation, its relationships, all of these are connected to the family's integrity in ways that are not always visible from the outside, but are fundamental to everything we have built. She listened. Foreign involvement in the personal dimensions of the family has historically created complications, not because of the people themselves, but because of the structural pressures that different contexts create. Different expectations, different families, different understandings of what family obligation means. She waited. Park Eun-suk stopped walking and turned to look at her directly. I am telling you this not to be unkind. I am telling you this because I believe in direct communication, and because I believe you are intelligent enough to understand what I am saying and to take it seriously. Josephine looked at her. This woman who had built a family's social architecture over 30 years, who had walked into a room and assessed her in 3 seconds and communicated an entire position without a single unnecessary word. I understand what you are saying, Josephine said. I respect that you said it directly, and I would like to offer you the same directness in return. Park Eun-suk was still. I am in Seoul to do excellent work. That is the primary and honest reason I am here, and the reason I have stayed. Whatever personal dimension you believe you have observed has not been invited by me, and I have not acted on it. I cannot speak to what is or is not happening on your son's side, because that is not mine to speak to. What I can tell you is that I am not a person who approaches any dimension of my life without complete clarity about what I am doing and why. And I am telling you that directly because you deserve the same honesty you offered me. Park Eun-suk looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "Your parents raised you well." It was not a concession. It was not warmth. It was the first data point of a revised assessment, and Josephine understood the difference. "They did," she said. "I tell them so regularly." Something happened at the corners of Park Eun-suk's carefully composed expression. They walked back. The evening ended. Taxis were called. Park Sing-ho shook her hand with genuine warmth. Park Min-joon said, "See you next time," with the confidence of someone who had already decided there would be a next time. Park Min-jae said nothing during the goodbyes, because Park Min-jae expressed things through the quality of his attention rather than the quantity of his words, and the quality of his attention during the goodbye communicated everything it needed to. In the taxi home, she called Adeyemi. The mother looked at me like I was a variable she had not accounted for. "That's because you are. How was the rest?" "The father is genuine. The younger brother has no filters and announced he liked me to the entire table." "Naturally." The mother told me in a corridor that foreign involvement in the family has historically created complications. There was a silence. She said that. In a corridor, after dessert, directly. "And you said?" "I told her I was in Seoul to do excellent work, and that I had not acted on anything, and that I was a person who operated with complete clarity." "Josephine." "What?" "You told the Korean chairman's mother that you had not acted on anything." "Which is true." "Which implies there is something to act on." She looked out the taxi window at Seoul moving past in its Friday evening light. "I am aware of the implication." "Are you?" "Adeyemi, I am just saying." "I know what you are just saying." "Do you?" She did. The following weeks were characterized by a quality she had not encountered in 14 months of Seoul. The particular quality of professional work that was entirely genuine and entirely excellent, and was also conducting itself in the presence of something she had not decided what to do with yet. The Park Group engagement expanded. The work was substantive and she was good at it, and he was the kind of client who made her better at it because his attention to the work was complete, and his questions were the kind that required her to think rather than retrieve, and she found this, professionally, deeply satisfying. He came to their Tuesday meetings prepared in ways that told her he had been thinking about the previous week's conversation in the interval. She came prepared in ways that told the same story from her side, and they both understood this, and neither of them referenced it because the work was the container, and the container was honest and sufficient. Outside the work were the smaller things. The coffee from the place 2 streets from the office that he brought to Tuesday meetings without announcing it as a gesture, simply placed on the conference table with the naturalness of someone who had noted a preference and acted on it. The Korean phrase he used once to describe a complex market dynamic that assumed she would understand it, and that she did understand, and that she responded to in Korean, and after which the meetings became bilingual in a way that felt like something shifting. The afternoon in week 8, when the meeting ran late and the office emptied, and they were both still at the conference table with the Seoul evening coming through the windows, and she was explaining a strategic positioning concept using a diagram, and he was watching the diagram and also watching her explain it, and neither of those things was the other thing, and both of them were. She had looked up from the diagram. He had been looking at her, not at the diagram. The quality of the look was the full, unmanaged version of the attention that he applied to things that mattered to him, and it landed with the weight of something that had been precise and patient and entirely intentional for 8 weeks. She had looked back. The diagram was between them on the conference table. Seoul was outside. Neither of them said anything for a moment that had the quality of a decision being made without words. Then she had said, very clearly, "Park Min-jae-si, I need you to understand that I am a person who acts with complete clarity, and I am not currently clear." He had looked at her with the dark, attentive eyes. What would make it clear? Time, and honesty, and the understanding that whatever this is exists in a context that includes your mother's position and my professional responsibilities, and the fact that I am a Nigerian woman in Seoul, and none of those things are simple. He had been quiet for a moment. I know. I have thought about all of them. And I would like to keep thinking about them with you, rather than separately. She had sat with that. That is a very specific request. You respond to specificity. She had looked at him across the diagram on the conference table. I do, she had said. Good, eh? Yes. The months that followed were not simple, and she had not expected them to be, and she had prepared for the unsimplicity the way she prepared for everything, by understanding it as completely as possible, rather than by hoping it would be less than it was. Park Eun-suk's position did not change immediately. It shifted incrementally in the way that positions held by intelligent and principled people shifted, through the accumulation of evidence that required the position to be updated. She encountered Josephine at 3 family events over 4 months, and at each one she was precisely civil, and occasionally something slightly warmer than civil, and always watching with the assessment that had been running since the corridor conversation after the Friday dinner.
Adeyemi flew to Seoul in month 3. She arrived, assessed the situation with the efficiency of someone who had known Josephine for 17 years, met Park Min-jae at a dinner that Josephine had arranged with significant personal trepidation, and afterward said the following: "He looks at you like you are the most interesting and most important thing currently happening. He is attentive. Josephine, that is not attentiveness. That is a man who has made a decision. He expressed interest in continuing a conversation. That was his framing. His framing was a man telling you he has made a decision in the most specific way available to him." She had looked at Adeyemi. "You sound like Kwame. Kwame is right. I am right. The man is right. What are you waiting for?" She had thought about it. "I am waiting for his mother." Adeyemi had looked at her. "Say more." "She is the architecture of that family. Whatever exists between me and Park Min-jae exists inside the architecture. And the architecture has not yet determined what to do with me. Until it does, I am a variable in someone else's structure, and I do not build anything inside a structure I do not understand." Adeyemi had been quiet for a moment. Then, "You are the most specific human being I have ever known. You have said that before. It keeps being true. The night everything changed was in month 4. It was not a dramatic evening. It did not announce itself as significant. It was a Wednesday, and she was at a cultural foundation event that Park Eun-suk chaired. She had been invited through the Park Group's corporate membership, and she had considered whether to attend, and had decided that attending and being present, and being exactly herself, was the most honest available option. The event was a chamber music concert, followed by a reception. The music was exceptional, and she listened to it with the complete attention she gave to things that deserved it. During the reception, she was standing near a window with a glass of wine, looking at the Seoul night when Park Eun-suk appeared beside her. Not arranged this time. Or perhaps arranged differently, arranged in the way that things were arranged when someone had decided something and was ready to act on it. They stood together for a moment looking at the city. "You came alone tonight." Yes, Min-jae had a board meeting that ran late. She used his name without the honorific. She had been using it for 4 months. Park Eun-suk would know this. Park Eun-suk looked at the city. "My husband's mother did not approve of me when we first met." Josephine listened. "I was from the right family and the right background, and she still did not approve of me. Because approval in a family like ours is not about the categories. It is about whether a person understands what they are entering and whether they are strong enough for it. She said nothing. I watched her disapprove of me for 2 years. And then one night there was a crisis. A significant one, the kind that revealed who people were when the architecture they had built was under pressure. And in that crisis I did not perform strength. I simply had it. And she saw it. Josephine turned to look at her. Park Yoon-suk was looking at the city. I have been watching you for 4 months. I have watched you work. I have watched you navigate my family's social events without adjusting yourself for them. I have watched you with my son, not performing anything, not managing anything, simply being exactly who you are with the same consistency whether he is watching or not. She waited. I have also been asking questions. About your work, about your reputation, about the people who have worked with you and the people who know you. She paused. Your managing director said you were the most honest professional he had ever employed. A client from your Lagos office said you had rebuilt their entire external communication structure in 6 months, and it had not required a single revision. Your best friend said, the slight pause of someone quoting something unexpected, that you were the most specific human being currently operating on the African continent. Josephine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Adeyemi. She was very thorough when I called her. You called Adeyemi. I call everyone. It is how I build complete pictures. She stood at the window of the Cultural Foundation event and felt the particular quality of a situation that had been building for 4 months arriving at its point. I am going to tell you something that I have not said to my son yet because I believe he should hear it from me directly, and I will tell him tomorrow. She listened. I was wrong to conduct this assessment the way I conducted it. Not because the assessment itself was wrong. Knowing who is entering your family's life is never wrong. But the framing I chose in the corridor after the Friday dinner was unfair. I spoke to you about structural complications before I had given you the dignity of being seen as a person rather than a variable. Josephine stood very still. You were direct with me that evening. You told me you operated with clarity. 4 months of observation have confirmed that you do. And clarity, genuine clarity, not performed clarity, is the thing my family's structure most requires in the people who enter it. She turned to look at Josephine directly. Minyi has not made me feel that he was certain about someone since his father. I do not give you that information lightly. I understand. I am not giving you my approval tonight. I am telling you that my assessment has changed. Approval is built over time. What I am offering you is the beginning of a fair assessment rather than a predisposed one. Josephine looked at this woman who had built a family's architecture over 30 years, who had called Adeyemi, who had spent 4 months watching and asking questions, and had arrived at a window on a Wednesday night with the willingness to say she had been unfair. Gamsa Hamnida, she said, thank you. I receive that as the significant thing it is. Park Yoon-suk looked at her. For the first time since the Friday dinner, what was in the look was not calculation. It was the beginning of something else. Your Korean is very good. I worked hard at it. I know, I asked about that too. The smallest thing happened at the corners of Josephine's mouth. The smallest thing happened at the corners of Park Yoon-suk's. They stood at the window together and looked at Seoul. Later in the taxi home she called Park Minyi. He answered immediately. Your mother called Adeyemi. A moment of absolute stillness on the other end. When, sometime in the last 4 months apparently, Adeyemi gave her a full report. What did Adeyemi say? Among other things she said I was the most specific human being currently operating on the African continent. She is not wrong. Your mother apparently agrees. Josephine. She told me her assessment has changed. She said she was going to tell you tomorrow. He was quiet for a moment. Are you all right? The question, so simple and so specific in its direction, landed the way his attention always landed, with the weight of something that had been precisely intentional. Yes, she said, more than all right, I am clear. She felt rather than heard what happened on his end. The particular quality of relief in the presence of the thing it had been waiting for. Jeongmul, really. Jeongmul, really. She looked at Seoul through the taxi window. The city that had rewarded her patience. The city that had given her the work and the learning and the 14 months of becoming more specifically herself than she had been when she arrived. She thought about the corridor after the Friday dinner. The 3-second look. The calligraphy about protecting what mattered. She thought about 4 months of Tuesday meetings and bilingual diagrams and coffee from 2 streets over. She thought about Adeyemi saying the man has made a decision in the most specific way available to him. She thought about a woman at a window who had called everyone and arrived at a fair assessment and offered it without being asked. She thought about clarity. She had told him she was not clear. She was clear now. Right now, if this story did something to your chest, and you have been sitting with it since the corridor scene, drop a comment and type, "The mother called Adiz," and that changed everything. Because Park Yoon-suk called Adiz across international lines and gathered a complete picture, and then told a woman at a window that she had been unfair. And that is the most significant thing a person with that much structural power can do, and it deserves every single comment. Tell me your moment. Was it the 3-second look at the dinner? Was it Park Min-jin announcing he liked her to the entire table? Was it the diagram on the conference table and the full unmanaged attention? Was it your mother raised you well delivered without sentiment? Was it the window conversation? Was it Josephine saying she was clear? Tell me everything. And if you are here because you love AFROK, STORYVRSC, because you love a story where a black girl does not shrink for anyone, including the most formidable mother-in-law in Seoul, and still earns the beginning of a fair assessment, subscribe. Hit the bell every single notification. This channel was built for exactly this story and exactly the person watching it right now. More stories, more Josephine, more characters, more moments. Do not miss one. Annyeong, my loves.